Hello students. So I'm going to quickly review what we're going to do today. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to go to your class homepage, and then you're going to go to our newest unit, which is 8.5 Taxonomy. It's a baby unit, and you're going to click on the unit overview. Once you click on the unit overview, it'll take you here. You're going to click on the Google Slides. Right? You're going to click on that, go to File, make a copy, put in your name, you know the deal. Okay, so now that you're in the student slide, make sure that you keep it not on the slideshow, but on the regular visual, so that you can add in things into the different text box as we go along in my teacher version of the same presentation. We're going to be talking about taxonomy. Taxonomy is the science of classifying organisms. So, first of all, what I'm going to ask is, what are these animals? Do you know? And would you group them together in a zoo? Why? Why not? You might group them together because they kind of look similar, don't they? They both have 4 legs, they both have fur, they both have these long snouts. But on the left-hand side is a baby tapir, and on the right-hand side is an elephant shrew. One is about the size of maybe my fist, and one can grow up to several hundred pounds. So they probably should not be grouped together in a zoo. So classification is about organizing forms into groups, and so that's why I brought up the zoo. If you thought about how zoos were organized, you might have all of the reptiles together, all of the butterflies together, all of the organisms from South America together, all of the organisms from deserts together. You're going to group them based on their either ecosystems or country of origin or something along those lines. Similar to your drawers. Like, I don't know about you, but I have like a sock drawer, I have like a tank top drawer. So I have my drawers organized by type as well. And grocery stores are organized the same way. They're organized by food type. You have your canned goods in one aisle, pastas in another. My boys like to call this organism the danger noodle. Is that considered to be a common name? Maybe, maybe not. Typically, what we would call this is a rattlesnake. If you were really in the know, you might call it a timber rattlesnake. That refers to its common name, but sometimes common names can be confusing. This scientific name for this organism is Crotalus horridus. I think you know what horridus means. Now, I said that common names can be confusing, and they are. If you see the 3 different organisms on this page, you will know that they are completely different. But one's called a sea lion, one's called an ant lion, and one's called a lion. So see how the common names could be confusing? That word lion doesn't actually mean the same thing, although we do use it as a descriptive characteristic. Common names can also be confusing in that not all gray wolves are actually gray. They come in a variety of colors, from a light silver to a dark, almost black color, and black bears aren't all black. In fact, most of them have a huge swaths of their fur, which is brown. And then I'll ask you this question, because I got into a fight once with one of my students because we came across what I called a water moccasin. And I was like, get out of the water, there's a water moccasin. And he's like, Mrs. P, that's a cottonmouth. And I was like, it's a water moccasin. He said, it's a cottonmouth. We looked it up. It was the same thing. He was from Louisiana. I knew a water moccasin from here. And we called them different things, even though it was the same organism. That lack of communication could have actually caused harm to him as a student. And that's why we as scientists need to have a way to clearly and concisely communicate with other scientists in the naming of organisms. The person who came up with our current organism, or who's given credit for it, is Carl Linnaeus. He used Greek and Latin names to organize organisms from the most inclusive groups to the least inclusive groups, meaning that he went from very not specific to very specific. All organisms are actually placed into 3 large groups called domains. There's bacteria, archaeobacteria, and eukarya. We've already talked about this. Eukaryotes have eukaryotic cells, which contain a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. The other two groups we're not going to discuss in a lot of detail, bacteria and archaeobacteria, but they do not have membrane-bound organelles or a nucleus. The order for the current naming system goes domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And we use these last two, the genus and the species, as its scientific name. People have lots of different ways to remember that order, but I like to think of it as darn King Philip came over for great soup, or I've heard darn King Philip came over from Germany to Spain. You might have something else that you use to remember it, but that is the way I remember it. So if you don't have a way to remember it, you can use mine. So you can see that in this naming system, we go from the most inclusive or the least specific to the least inclusive or the most specific. In fact, the most specific is here at the bottom under species. That's another fun way to help you remember things. Domain. Remember I said there was 3 domains? There was eubacteria, archaeobacteria, and eukarya. Then there's kingdoms, phylums, class, order. In this case, we have carnivora, Canidae, Vulpes, and then this is the species name is also Vulpes. So its scientific name would be Vulpes vulpes, or a red fox would be its common name. So if we're looking here, we've got kingdom, Animalia. We have phylum Chordata, Mammalia, we're mammals. Primate, Hominidae, which we've talked about before, Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens is the scientific name for humans. So if I was to write that, I would write it in italics. I would use genus and species for my scientific name. The first letter is always capitalized in genus, but it is not capitalized in species. So we call this system binomial nomenclature, which is a 2-name naming system. Don't forget to capitalize the genus and not to capitalize the species, and then you're going to put it in italics. That's more difficult when you're handwriting things, so I suggest, if you know cursive, to do the scientific name in cursive. Take a moment and silently look at the organization from kingdom to species. Notice these are all eukarya, so I didn't need to include the domain, okay? But from kingdom to species, and figure out how you would write their scientific names. Just do it in your head. You don't have to shout it out. You don't have to disturb anybody. It should be Panthera leo, Panthera tigris, and Anis acuta. Now, what's really important is to see that you've got Panthera here and Panthera here and Anis here. These are in a different genus, right? This is in a different genus. So if organisms, the longer that they stay the same as we're going down this this classification order, the more closely they are related. Now remember, we were talking about the rattlesnake. Okay, so if we were looking at these names, and we had the rattlesnake was Crotalus horridus, which of these represents the diamondback rattlesnake? So this was the timber rattlesnake. Which one would represent the diamondback rattlesnake? If you said C, Crotalus atrox, you're probably correct. We know that because we would expect them to share the same genus, because we would expect them to be closely related. So, the naming system is called what? Binomial nomenclature, which means a 2-name naming system. Remember, the names either must be underlined. If you're printing, you can underline it instead of writing it in cursive if you don't know how to write it in cursive, or italicize. Genus should be capitalized, species is lowercase. Sometimes it can be abbreviated, where you have, if you're doing a lot like a scientific paper, you might have Panthera abbreviated as P, Leo. So if we're talking about lots of Pantheras, you might abbreviate it in a paper, and that's fine. Sometimes if we're talking about an organism where we know the genus but we don't know the species, we can say chlorella and then SP for species. Now remember when we were talking about evolution and speciation, we had a definition for the word species. Species are defined as organisms that will naturally interbreed with another and produce fertile or viable offspring. Viable just means an organism is healthy, it can reproduce and do everything that its parents could do. Organisms that have been interbred between two different species are sometimes called hybrids. Oftentimes they'll have characteristics from both parents, but they'll be either unhealthy or they'll be unable to reproduce. For example, ligers are a combination between a lion and a tiger. You can see this beautiful cat is a liger, and it's got the markings of a lion, but also, the markings of a tiger, but has a little bit of a mane like a lion. Unfortunately, ligers are either going to be unhealthy or they are going to be sterile, meaning they can't have their own offspring. Mules are a combination between donkeys and horses, and once again, they're sterile. So although you can make a living organism that's healthy, sometimes they're not going to be truly viable, meaning they're not able to reproduce. Take a moment and let's see how you did. You can go ahead and pause this presentation at this point. You can then fill this out, your check for understanding, fill it out quietly. Then you can download this as a PDF and submit it in Blackbaud. Thank you. I hope you have a good day.